All right, well, it's time now for another look at the day's papers, and Solange Mougin is here with us. Solange, you're starting off, of course, with the inauguration of Lula in Brazil. How is the Brazilian press treating his comeback?
Well, 12 years after leaving power, Lula is back for a third term, as we see in the Brazilian paper, Folha de Sao Paulo. It says that Lula has vowed to put the country back on track after Jair Bolsonaro's term. Quote, "The nightmare is over," he said in a tearful inaugural speech, adding that he thinks that democracy is the true winner of this election, as Bolsonaro has refused to concede and was in Florida on Sunday, rather than passing on, as tradition has it, the presidential sash. Now, for Veja, this was a courageous investiture, it says, where they say that if Lula succeeds this term, he will become, quote, "the most important worker turned politician in the history of Latin America." Now, for O Globo, it writes that Lula has been given the chance for a different ending. It writes, quote, "Destiny has offered him a chance to finish his political career in a way that was unheard of when he went to prison on corruption charges." But for O Itchedao, it says that Lula's vision is one of a bygone era, a retrograde one where society, the economy, and culture are appendages of the state. And it argues, nonetheless, the liberal paper argues, nonetheless, that despite fears otherwise, this was a transition of power that was a success, as it went off without a hitch.
Well, Solange, while people in one corner of the world then are welcoming a new leader, Lula, of course, others are bidding farewell to another, and that is Pope Benedict, the tributes rolling in for the retired pontiff who passed away at the age of 95.
Yeah, let's begin with La Croix, the Catholic paper. It is focusing actually on Benedict's retirement, his final decade, how in 2013 he surprised the world by retiring. And it argues that he will be remembered largely for that. But retirement aside, he was, according to the paper, quote, "an immense theologian who was not willing to confront the troubled era that he was thrown into," end quote. For his firmness and attachment to classic Christian doctrine, the Italian paper La Repubblica, it calls the former pope the ultimate conservative, noting that his funeral is Thursday and it's expected to draw some 60,000 people to the Vatican. Now, for the conservative French paper Le Figaro, quote, "Benedict was a great pope with such a gentle smile," it says, a lot of praise there, noting that he was often, in their view, unjustly criticized, for they say he was simply following the mission set out for him by John Paul II to prevent further fractures in the church, and doing that through dialogue. So quite a bit of praise from Le Figaro. As Politico notes Politico.eu notes, in its obit, that this was the continuity candidate. His critics pegged him the, quote, "God's Rottweiler," because of his staunch adherence to doctrine. So there was praise, but also criticism there, as Politico notes. And finally, the New York Times, it has an interesting opinion piece on this sticking to classic doctrine. It argues that Pope Benedict's goal was a unity in the church that was blown apart by his successor, that Joseph Ratzinger fight has been challenged by Pope Francis's progressive positions, but the Times notes the fight over the future face of the church is, quote, has only just begun.
Now, here in France, Solange, the papers are discussing what's slated to be the top political story of the year.
Yeah, in his New Year's address on Saturday, Emmanuel Macron, he laid out his plans to move ahead with a number of policies, as Les Echos shows us, and top among them, as L'Opinion notes as well, is his long sought-after pension reforms push. L'Opinion says that Macron paid tribute to the unity of the country, all the while peddling reforms that, quote, profoundly divide it, and that he risks seeming in another reality, according to L'Opinion. And this is going to be, according to Le Parisien, a very risky January for the president, one where the boat is going to rock after the government announces its plans on January 10th. The left-leaning paper L'Humanité, it says that Macron's plea for the French workers to work longer to move retirement age to 65, while also cutting unemployment benefits, is just about feeding capitalism. And finally, Coco has a cartoon on the issue. She has Macron wishing the French good health for in the new year. That is until you pop your dentures and turn 65.
Sounds like more political upheaval maybe than to come in 2023 here in France, Solange. Well, finally, ringing in the new year is for many, of course, synonymous with drinking on the 31st and then going cold turkey for the rest of the month.
Yeah, and as with every year, at least in recent years, papers are talking about dry January or not drinking for the entire month of January to reset one's relationship with alcohol. The Washington Post, it tells us that this is something that actually has long-term benefits beyond the month of January if you don't drink. And as well, Le Monde, it says it has interviewed an addict specialist who says that it is a moment to raise one's awareness about one's alcohol consumption, and it talks about a study that shows that 6 out of 10 people, they actually drink less 6 months after dry January because it helps them reassess their relationship with alcohol. But if a cold turkey month, no alcohol in January is too much for some, Fortune tells us there is another option that is damp January, or when you try to drink not as much but are still allowed a glass of wine or two every once in a while.
First time I'm hearing of damp January, Solange. Certainly sounds like a good compromise for those for whom going completely cold turkey is just too difficult. Solange Moujon, thank you very much.